Hello again, it's Mrs. Booth, ready to continue on our exciting journey through rainforest ecosystems together, following on our science learning. Today, we are going to be looking at classifying organisms. Organisms, do you remember that word? Organisms, what does it mean? You're right, living things, an individual living thing like you and me. So, before we go much further, I thought we'd get our brains warmed up again. This time, I'm going to get you to look really closely at an ecosystem. Have a look at this ecosystem from a polar region. What do you think doesn't belong in this ecosystem? Can you see anything? Have a good look. Did you find the snake and the daisy bush? A snake wouldn't be able to survive in this ecosystem. It doesn't have its habitat. It's cold-blooded, and it wouldn't be able to survive in such a cold climate. The bush wouldn't have enough water or warmth either to survive there. So you're right, it would not live in this ecosystem, this collection or community of animals, plants, habitats, and microorganisms. Speaking of microorganisms, do you remember what these tiny ones in the circles might be? Plankton, you're right. Plankton, which are eaten often by whales or bigger fish. And these even smaller ones would be algae. Excellent. Well done. I think we're warmed up. So, today you're going to need your pencil or your pen. You will need a ruler today. So if you need to pause to go get that or grab it out of your pencil case, you can go do that now. And you'll need your workbook or a piece of paper to work on. Hit pause if that's what you need to go find for today. Okay, let's get going. So, our key vocabulary today, we had organism last time, and habitat and ecosystem. What will we have today? Classify. I'm sure you've heard of classify today before. Classify is when we group or find groups of things, items, that have similar characteristics. We look at comparing differences and similarities, and we group things together. Classify. Vertebrate. Can you say it? Vertebrate. Excellent. And invertebrate. These talk about the skeleton of an animal. We'll go into which one's which later. Herbivore. Herbivore, excellent. Carnivore. And omnivore. All of this vocabulary helps us to classify, to group animals into different groups, and we'll go into detail how each of these words works later. So, here's our rainforest ecosystem again. Our rainforest collection of animals and plants and habitats and microorganisms that work together to create an ecosystem. What animals can you see? And there's lots of different types. Could you group any of these animals? The ones that pop to my mind are birds. There seem to be birds everywhere in this rainforest picture. Could you find any mammals? Remember, mammals are warm-blooded creatures with hair, and they often will give live young, and they feed their young with milk. Lemurs, yes. Jaguar, excellent. What about reptiles? Could you see any reptiles? I've had a good look and I couldn't see any reptiles like lizards or crocodiles. But there would normally be reptiles in this rainforest ecosystem. Amphibians, frogs that need water to live in. There's lots of frogs. We said there were lots of birds with feathers, insects, can't see any insects, but they would normally be hidden probably in the leaves and the bark of trees and maybe on the floor. And then of course fish in the river. So we can classify, and you should already know from when you were doing your living things in the infants, that there are 6 key groups, key classes of animals, and they are the mammals, reptiles, amphibians, birds, insects, and fish. This is something you should be familiar with. But how do biologists, scientists that study the living world, actually officially classify organisms, living things, individual living things, in an ecosystem? Are there any other ways that we can classify organisms in an ecosystem? Let's find out. So, when biologists are classifying animals, they often have lots of different ways and different things to think about. One thing they use to classify, to group animals, is habitats, where they live, the place that they actually live. Sometimes that can be whether it's their climate, whether they live in cold climates, or whether they live in oceans, or whether they live in deserts. These habitats, you will find certain groups of animals in certain habitats and others in different ones. For example, you wouldn't find a shark in a desert, not got enough water for it there. So biologists can classify group animals according to where they live, the place they live in, the habitat. They can also classify animals according to the food that they eat. They can group them according to what food they eat. And the final way that we will look at in just a moment is the skeletons, the physical makeup of animals, what is in their bodies and outside of their bodies, and how that compares to other animals. So let's start there. All animals in the animal kingdom can be sorted into 2 groups. Those 2 groups are vertebrate and invertebrate. Let's say it again, vertebrate and invertebrate. So, vertebrate are animals which have a backbone. Can you think of any animals that might have a backbone? Sitting up straight here. I know I've got a backbone, so humans must be vertebrates. Can you think of any other animals that might have a backbone? Did you think of a snake, or a fish, or a horse? These animals all have a backbone, which helps them in their movements. If vertebrate is an animal with a backbone, what do you think invertebrate might mean? You're right. It's an animal without a backbone. So animals have either a backbone or no backbone. Can you think of any animals at all that might have no backbones? I can think of one that really usually creeps me out. What about spiders? I'm very scared of spiders. Animals without backbones are often sometimes found in the sea, like jellyfish and squid. They can be found in your garden with butterflies and worms. Insects are often invertebrates. They don't have a backbone in their skeleton. So, now that we know what a vertebrate is, an animal with a backbone, and an invertebrate is an animal without, and we know all animals in the animal kingdom can be sorted using these 2 classifications, I'm going to ask you to do some classifying. You will need your ruler and your paper now. So, let's have a quick look. Vertebrates are where our mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish live. If you are a fish or an amphibian or a reptile, a bird or a mammal, you are a vertebrate. You have a backbone. If you do not have a backbone, you're probably an insect or some kind of arachnid, spider, or some kind of exoskeleton like a crab. So, here is your task. On your piece of paper, I would like you to draw this table. We are going to be classifying these rainforest animals. So you will need your column for your animals, a column for vertebrate and a column for invertebrate. You might want to pause now. We'll go through the instructions of how to fill it in a moment. Got your table sorted? Great job. So, a parrot is a bird. A parrot is a bird. Is it a vertebrate with a backbone, or is it an invertebrate without a backbone? Let's have a think about that parrot. Can you see from its head, and having a good close observation and knowing that is a bird, is it a vertebrate or invertebrate? You're right. It's a vertebrate. It has got a backbone. Let's look at the ant then. It's actually a bullet ant, one of the most deadly things that you can get from an ant, from that bullet ant. Glad that they don't exist in our ecosystem here. What do you think? Is it a vertebrate or an invertebrate? It is an insect. Does that help you with your classifying? You're right, it is an invertebrate. It doesn't have a black backbone. And if you have a look closer, you can see the parts of its body that are joined together, and the legs, the 6 legs, 3 on either side of its abdomen, its body, its tummy. So you have 3 more animals to classify, vertebrate or invertebrate. What is the jaguar, a spider, and a crocodile? You might want to pause now if I'm going too fast. Let's see. A jaguar is a mammal. So, is a jaguar a vertebrate or an invertebrate? You're right. It's a vertebrate. All mammals are vertebrates. That's including us. We're mammals. We have live young and we feed them milk, just like jaguars do. And we are vertebrates like it too. Spider. That tarantula there looks quite big and hairy. It's an arachnid. Does that help you with your classifying? Is it a vertebrate or an invertebrate? Excellent. It's an invertebrate. Finally, our final rainforest animal is a crocodile. A crocodile is a reptile. Lives close to water but is also on land. Is it a vertebrate or invertebrate? It's a vertebrate. It has a spine. It has a backbone going all the way down its back. Well done. Great job. If you've got something wrong, just change, and maybe you might want to help your classifying down the side by saying what class of animal, bird, mammal, arachnid. It might help you to remember. So, biologists, scientists who study the living world, classify animals by their habitats, the place they live, and their skeletons. We talked about they also look at the diet, the food animals live. How on earth does the food that animals eat help with classifying? Well, diet is the food that animals eat to gain energy. Energy is key for animals' survival. When we talked about surviving, organisms surviving, food and energy was one of the key important things. So, what does diet tell you about different animals? Well, one type classified animal is a carnivore. Carnivores are meat eaters. They will eat meat to gain energy. The food they eat, the food that they have decided to eat gives them energy, and they eat meat. Lions are one of the most iconic carnivores in the animal kingdom. So if we have a carnivore, what's our next type of animal going to be? Herbivore. Excellent. Herbivores eat plants. Here we've got a giraffe, and there it is. It eats only plants. It does not eat any other animals. It is not a carnivore. It eats plants to gain energy. Carnivores eat meat. Herbivores eat plants. So then there's a third class of animal, from looking at diet. We've got carnivore, meat, herbivore, plant, and then we have our omnivore. Have a think, what do you think this animal might eat for its energy? An omnivore. You're right. It eats both plants and meat, both together. Now, bears are well known for their hunting skills in the water to get the fish and salmon, but they also eat a lot of plants as well. They are omnivores. They eat both meat and plants. Ready for your next task. I'm going to ask you to draw a Venn diagram. A Venn diagram is a tool that scientists and mathematicians use to sort lots of items. And in this case, we're going to be sorting animals from the animal kingdom. In one circle, I'd like you to put the label carnivore, and in the other circle, which overlaps that first circle, herbivore. And then you should have a little section in the middle where it's overlapped that has omnivore. Have a look at the screen now, press pause, and draw your Venn diagram. So this is how the Venn diagram works. We can put our animal into the section that it needs. So a giraffe is a herbivore. It needs to go in the herbivore section. All the animals that would go in here would only eat plants. You're right. Okay. Then we can put our lion in the carnivore section. Okay, because it eats meat, it eats other animals. You're right, excellent. So we have our herbivore in this section and our carnivore here. Here in the middle, where herbivore and carnivore meet, we have omnivore, and that is where we would place our bear. Now, you are not going to do those today. I'm giving you some more rainforest animals, and I will read through what they are and what they eat. In the table, you will see the animal from the rainforest, and then the diet next to it of what it eats. So we've got the harpy eagle here, and its diet is sloths and monkeys and iguanas and parrots. What kind of animal could we classify that as? Sloths, monkeys, iguanas. Is it a carnivore, a meat eater, an omnivore, or a herbivore? It's a meat eater, so it's going to go in my carnivore section of my circle. I would just write the word harpy eagle. You don't need to draw. This is science. We can just be sorting these animals. You can write the word harpy eagle in the carnivore section. So pause now and read through each of the animals and the diet that it is, and then sort your animals into your Venn diagram. Have a pause. See you in a second. Have you sorted them all? You looked carefully at each of their diets and written the name of each of the animals in your Venn diagram somewhere. Great. Let's see if you got the same as me. So here is the answer. Our carnivores, there were only two carnivores on the list, were the harpy eagle and the jaguar. They both ate animals. That was their main diet. Our omnivores, our animals that ate both plants and meat, were gorillas, chimpanzees, and toucans. I often forget that things like insects are meat too. So if a toucan is eating insects and smaller animals, it is still eating meat. So that makes it an omnivore, eating both fruit and plants and meat and insects. And then our herbivores were fruit bats and the leaf cutter ant. Fungi is the kind of microorganism that grows with plants. Microorganism, living thing, tiny living thing. We'd have to look in the microscope to be able to see it. So if we have this Venn diagram for classifying our rainforest animals, where would our microorganism, our tiny living thing, algae, go in our Venn diagram? Algae. Where would it go? You're right. It would sit outside of our Venn diagram. It'd sit outside because it doesn't need to eat food for it to have energy. It's just like a plant. And how do plants get their energy? Do you remember? This will be learning from before. Plants get their energy from photosynthesis. They take the sun and they soak up water, and they are able to make in their leaves their own energy, and that's how they gain their food. They don't eat food like other animals do. That's the difference in our organisms. So, before we go, I want you to have a think about this gorgeous creature. I know that you know it's not a fish, but what is it about this animal that makes it not a fish? You might even know what it's called, but how do you know that this is not part of the fish family? Think about its makeup, its physical makeup, its skeleton, maybe its diet, perhaps its shelter, its habitat. Can you explain why this animal is not a fish? You're going to have to use your scientist observation skills to look at this carefully. It seems a silly question. This is clearly not a fish. We have got in front of us a very famous animal from the rainforest, the sloth, a very slow, famous animal from the rainforest. We know that this is not a fish, firstly, because its habitat is not water. All fish live in water, and this animal quite clearly is living in a tree. So already we know that this is not a fish. I can begin to look at what kind of animal it is just from looking at it by knowing that it has hair. What animals have hair? Birds have feathers, reptiles, scales. Mammals have got hair, and this is quite long hair. So I know that this animal must be a mammal. I can't tell from this photo whether this animal is a herbivore or a carnivore. So I'd have to do some more observations of it in the wild to be able to tell that. But I can tell you now why it is not a fish, because it is not in the habitat of water, and it is not, and its hair show that it must be a mammal. Well, we have come to the end of another ecosystem lesson. Well done, excellent work. I'm sure you're really proud of some of that language you've been using. You can be showing off now to your family. Classify. What does classify mean? Yes, grouping animals according to characteristics. We can classify according to habitat, their diet, and according to the physical makeup, the vertebrates or invertebrates. Speaking of, whether an animal has got a backbone, then it is an vertebrate. Well done. And if it's got no backbone, then it must be an invertebrate. And then we think about the diet. We have herbivores, which eat plants, well done, carnivores, which eat meat, and omnivores, which eat both. We are going to be looking at, in our next lesson, how we can start to use our observation skills to go further into the species of animals, how we can tell what one animal is and what one animal is not, and the tools like a classification key that helps us. Thank you very much for your hard work today, and I look forward to working with you in our next science lesson. Bye.